Hi, my name is TNG Christmas, and today we're going to discuss the issue of ethos or ethics in communication. It's important to discuss this because if people aren't ethical and they've been given the power of rhetoric, it can prove to be a very dangerous thing. So ethos is the Greek word for ethics, and the father of rhetoric, Aristotle, certainly had some things to say about what was and what is and what isn't ethical. Okay, so let's get started. There are three things one should consider when you're trying to determine if you're operating in ethos as a speaker and if someone you're listening to is operating in ethos. And those three things are good sense, good moral character, and goodwill. Good sense, good moral character, and goodwill. If we look at each of these more closely, we're going to see that good sense means that the person is competent, that they are knowledgeable about their subject matter, and they represent it in a reasonable and responsible manner. Okay. Now, I want to say with this, I want to make sure you understand that doesn't mean that no one in the audience has more knowledge than you. But it means that the majority of the people that you're speaking to are broadened by, or informed, or increased in some way by what it is you're sharing. The second thing that you want to operate under as a ethical speaker is good moral character. Make sure you present your message in a way that your audience members can understand, that is trustworthy and straightforward. If you do things that purposely deceive your audience, you're not being ethical, because they put a certain amount of trust in you, and that you're going to share things in a way that they can understand and that can and will empower them to make an informed decision. And then the last thing is basically goodwill. In this instance, you need to take almost a protective view towards members of your audience and make sure that you're giving them information that is in their best interest. You want to stay away from things that they either cannot make use of in a responsible way or that will hurt them in some manner. So goodwill is an important factor. Now, every time we talk about ethos, especially in this country where we have constitutional rights, the whole issue of goodwill, or good sense and good moral character, leads to a mentioning of our First Amendment rights. People will say, well, I have a right to talk about anything I want to talk about. You do, but that doesn't mean that everything that you choose to talk about is ethical. So let's see let's look at the First Amendment more closely and find out where the line is drawn when it comes to what's ethical. You can speak about anything you want to talk about, but if you're going to be ethical in doing so, you have and be covered under First Amendment rights. You have to make sure that you stay away from fighting words. That's words that provoke violence within those who are in the audience, and that you stay away from slander. You cannot defame a person and make it and damage their reputation when it comes to where they work or where they live. Okay, now public figures differ from private figures. If it is a public figure, you can say what you believe to be true until they tell you that it's not true. Once you have been officially given the truth, you must operate and communicate that truth. If you don't, you're not covered by the First Amendment, and you can be brought up on charges for showing reckless disregard for the truth. Now, probably the most famous case of this came with the issue of Michael Jackson in the National Enquirer. With this one, the National Enquirer printed that Michael Jackson was gay. And Michael Jackson, at that time, that was a big thing, and it hurt his reputation and things like that, so he took them to court. No, he went and did an interview with them. He did an interview with them, and they talked with him, interviewed him, and he said clearly during the interview, I'm not gay, I'm heterosexual, so please don't print that about me any further. So then he elected to to go on his way, and they went on their way, and he was going to let it go. But then they chose to print it again, even though he clearly told them the truth. At that point in time, he brought them up on charges. Now you may say, wait a minute, the National Enquirer, that's a magazine. They would never be stupid enough to do that. But see, back in that day, the National Enquirer had such an arsenal of lawyers that they could just take anybody, of any famous person, and just wear them out in the courts. But They had never encountered anyone with the physical resources of Michael Jackson and the passion. And Michael would not settle out of court. He wanted it to be, for them to be formally charged, because he said, you know, it's not right for you to just bully people and say what you want to say about them and destroy their lives. And so the National Enquirer no longer did that because they did lose the court case, and now they talk more about the two-headed baby and the person from Mars. You see, but they are very careful, not to show reckless disregard for the truth. Now, if you're talking about a private figure, you must be able to prove that what you're saying about them is true. If you can't, or it's found that you were untruthful, you could be brought up on charges of slander, and the First Amendment will not protect you. Now, the best example I can think of for this would involve let's say we have a student that's disgruntled with an instructor, because maybe the instructor is really making them toe the line. So they tell a friend, you know what, I'm gonna get them. And so they get with that instructor, and they pretend to be interested in turning things around. And they say, well, look, if you meet with me and take some time with me, I'm sure I can get my act together and whatnot. The teacher's touched, and so he or she meets with this person, and they meet with them behind closed doors. When they're done, the student walks out and accuses the instructor of doing something in violation of them. And people are incensed, and all of a sudden, that person's getting death threats. People are, spray painting their home, and threatening phone calls are coming in. They get suspended without pay. Their significant other has to take their child and move for safety. And then it comes out that the whole thing was fabricated. Well, you know what? That person is not protected under First Amendment rights, and they can be sued for slander. So yes, you do have First Amendment rights, but there are some limits. Now, what about racist comments? What about sexist comments? Can you make those? Yes, you can in our society. It's not illegal, and they are protected under First Amendment rights. However, they are not ethical. And because they violate ethos, if you engage in that in this class, you will lose points. So you want to stay away from that. What we want to do is operate under this fundamental moral precept. We want to not harm others and tell the truth. Now you may say, well, Tangi, does that mean that I can only talk about topics that are, that are non-controversial and, just very, straightforward kind of easygoing topics? No, that is not what that means. I really like it when you bring in interesting, complex, and controversial topics. That's not a problem. But here's what we mean by do not harm others and tell the truth. It's a matter of intent. Sometimes when people bring a topic to the podium to discuss, they bring it because they're angry and they want to get at some population that they feel has wronged them in some way. Okay? For instance, I had a student who was very angry about the fact that he could not marry his gay lover, and he got up to talk, and when he spoke, he used terms that were very harsh, like you heteros and you people, and he was very very angry in his display of his message, and people in the audience felt threatened. At the end of his presentation, you could hear a pin drop on the carpeting. People were so intimidated by him. I knew that this was out of character for this student, and so he and I spoke. And upon first mention, he came to me and he says, I know that you're gonna have a problem with me. I know that you're conservative and blah, blah, blah. I said, that's really not my issue. I do have beliefs, and I'm not ashamed of those beliefs, but what I'm concerned about here is what's going on with you. As it turns out, some of the students in the class gave him a hard time because he disclosed his sexual orientation. And I didn't know that he was being picked on. And yes, I know you say it in a college setting, it does happen. But then I asked him a question. I said, when you got up to speak, what was your intent? He said, I wanted to get them for what they'd done and said to me that was so mean and so harsh. And I said, that's where you crossed the line. When you decided to do them harm, even if it was just through verbal taunting, you were no longer ethical in your approach to things. Could you take on a controversial topic like same-sex marriage and be ethical? You certainly can. Are people going to be naturally offended by that? Yes. And so to not do harm does not mean not to offend. Offense will occur. But if your intent is to assault someone verbally, then that isn't ethical, and we really want to stay away from it. I did work through that issue with that student and the other students, and we came to a better understanding of what's appropriate. The other thing, though, is to lie to an audience. Don't purposely deceive people because you have knowledge that exceeds theirs, and you don't think they'll ever be the wiser. You may get away with it for the moment, but it could come back to haunt you in a very unpleasant way in the future. Okay? All right, now, why do people tend to mismanage ethos? A lot of times it comes from a faulty belief system or a fallacy. And there are 6 common fallacies in our society, but there are tons more. But here are 6 common ones that I like for students to be aware of, because they could find themselves the victim of them if they're not aware. Let the buyer beware. There are those that believe that if they can sell it and people are stupid enough to buy it, that they have every right to do that. I'll tell you that you are expected to have a competence in your when it comes to your subject matter, and in having that, it'll probably exceed most of those who are in your audience, and that's why they're coming to sit and listen to you. But you're never to take that competence that you have and use it to push on someone something that you know isn't right, okay? Everyone is doing it. Well, a thing can't become that's immoral or unethical, can't become ethical simply because there are a lot of people behind it. It's just a lot of people that are wrong, you see? The only crime is getting caught. I beg to differ. You know, there was a young lady, her name was Jessie Benet Ramsey, I think that was her name. She was killed in her basement. She was a little toddler in tears type of young lady. And they never did find who killed her. Just because that murderer wasn't caught, does that make them any less a murderer? I don't think so. If they catch them with the last breath they have in their body, they're still a murderer, and they should still be brought up on charges of it. Then if I didn't do it, someone else would. And so, because someone else would do something wrong, you should go ahead and do the wrong first. Is there something ethical in doing wrong before someone else does wrong? It makes you think. Steal from the rich and no one gets hurt. Any of you overworked and underpaid? You can thank a person who chose to try to steal from the rich for that. See, here's the thing. The rich is only going to lose so much money. And then after that, they're going to start to pass the loss down. And so where they could hire 2 of you to work or give you certain benefits, those get cut because they can't afford to give you those things or to hire more than one person because their profits are being eroded away through theft. You want to stay away from that one. And then the last one is you can't fight City Hall. You know, you can fight City Hall, but you have to follow the rules. There are students that get disgruntled about things every semester, and they, instead of looking at their catalog and finding the proper protocol for complaint, they simply go marching down to the president's office, demanding that they be heard on the issue. You know, the secretaries that are in there, they have a lot to do. And it's not that they don't care, but the first thing they're going to do is ask you if you followed the protocol. Now, if you haven't followed the protocol, guess what they're going to have you do? They're going to give you the proverbial pat on the shoulder to comfort and soothe you, but then they're going to send you out to follow the protocol. If you have followed the protocol, then they're likely to get you the assistance you need to get your problem properly addressed. So you can. Now, I don't want you to live in a fantasy world. Are you going to win every battle with City Hall? No one does. But you certainly win more battles than you would have if you follow the protocol. And that's the point. Now, why is a fallacy such a bad thing? And what exactly is it? Now that we've gone through a few of them, I think you'll understand this definition better. A fallacy is a shallow, unsubstantiated belief that does not follow sound logic. And the reason why you don't want to operate under fallacy is because If you do, in your time of need, that fallacy will leave you abandoned and looking stupid. Okay, so fallacy is a shallow, unsubstantiated belief that cannot withstand any level of scrutiny. You want to make sure you write that down. And so any belief that comes at you, you need to think through. It says, this been substantiated? Can it withstand scrutiny? Now let's go back to that situation where the young man was being taunted because he was a gay. The way we resolved the issue is I said, look, why don't we bring this to debate? So we decided to host a debate on same-sex marriage. There were 3 students in favor of it and 3 students elected to be on the team against it. The one that taunted the young man the most, the one student, came up to the podium and said basically this: I believe that same-sex marriage is wrong, and I believe it's wrong because it's nasty. I believe it's nasty because it's wrong, and I don't agree with it because it's wrong and it's nasty. And he sat down. True story. How do you think that made him look? See, there are people who are still trying to decide how they feel about this issue, and they want people who choose to speak on this to give them good, sound information and solid reasoning for their stance. And the student that said that was operating in fallacy and could provide none of it. The other student that he debated against basically wiped up the floor with him. And in the end, he did get his due. So I don't know how you feel about that subject, but that subject and other subjects are welcomed in the class. But if you're going to deal with them, don't deal with them based on fallacy. Do the homework to get a good sound reasoning behind you and represent your viewpoint in an ethical way. Now, where there is fallacy, there's also philosophy out in our society. What is a philosophy? It's a way of thinking. It's a paradigm. It's a system of thought that people use to govern themselves. It's a worldview or an outlook. It's a system of belief. All of these things can be used to describe or define or clarify for you what we mean by philosophy. Where some people operate based on fallacy and they don't really think through what it is they believe. Other people have thought it through and they operate based on a certain philosophy. There are many out there. I'd like to cover 4 of them in a very basic manner. Now, this isn't a course in ethics or philosophy. If you want to gain a more in-depth knowledge of these things, I do recommend that you take a course. We have several fine instructors that teach them here at our institution. Okay? The first philosophy we're going to look at is deontology. This one was put forth by Immanuel Kant, who said, look, a person who's ethical is a person who gains within them an understanding of certain principles and standards, and they hold to those standards regardless of the changing circumstances. Okay? They're not moved by the circumstances. They stick to what they believe, all right? And so you have people like the Amish community who, or the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, organizations that have creeds and things that they live by, standards that they live by. And they've lived by those standards throughout time, regardless of what others have had to say about them. They are true doers of deontology, so to speak. I know that's not the most professional phraseology, but one of the main tenets underneath that is called categorical imperatives. And so, are there standards within you that are constant? I know one that we were taught, my brother and I, when we were young, is that we don't steal. And so you'll find me now, my daughter gets upset with me all the time about it. We'll come out of the grocery store and I'll find some can of corn rolled underneath the basket in some way and didn't get acknowledged when we paid our bill. And you'll find me going back in to return that can of corn. And she says, they don't even know they were missing it. What is the big deal? It's just a can of corn. Well, that standard within me raises up. It says, no, that's stealing. It needs to be returned. And so then I return it. Now, the second philosophy is utilitarianism. And this one was put forth by John Stuart Mills, and he said, look, ethics should be judged based on the good done versus the bad. If the good outweighs the bad, then what's being done is considered ethical. Now, each philosophy has its strengths and they have their weaknesses. And so I didn't focus on that for deontology. I will get back to that, and this will all balance out. Utilitarianism is a sound philosophy in that it acknowledges that in some instances there is bad, but if the good done is more substantial than the bad that has to be done, then it's considered ethical. Now, the strength in this one is that it does acknowledge that sometimes things are dark, but if light comes out of it, we do need to consider it and move forward in it. Its weaknesses lie in the fact that it does not represent the needs of the minority very well. So this particular philosophy was used to support things like child labor and slavery and things like that. Why? Because the majority had such a strong representation that even though the minority had a very valid point, it struggled to be acknowledged. Okay, but it does have many good properties to it. Going back to deontology, though, I'm gonna go back for a minute and look at deontology. With this one, it does have that constant, and that's good. But if the belief is flawed in some way, it can lead to dire consequences. For instance, there are those that believe that blood transfusions are witchcraft. And so there have been instances where there were parents that had a child that had a condition that could have been readily addressed through a blood transfusion. But because they believed that transfusion was witchcraft, they wouldn't allow the child to have it, and the child died. Should the child have been made to sacrifice their life because of the belief of the parents? That gets a little troubling to hash through. There was a time in which tomatoes were considered to be poisonous, but someone, and that belief existed for a long time, but someone challenged that, and they challenged that standard. So there are times when the standards still need to be challenged within deontology as well. That's one of the weaknesses of it. Okay, the third philosophy is Social Contracts by John Rawls. And John Rawls says, hey, look, society cannot be allowed, all people in society can't be allowed to follow their own pursuits, because doing so will eventually cause for rights to be infringed upon in a negative fashion. So one person can't pursue their interests at the expense of another person. To stop this from happening, we have to have laws and customs and codes to govern our behavior so that we keep order and stability in our society. Now this comes into play when it comes to things like, let's just say a person in my class got up to go to the bathroom. And you were in my class, would you be all right with me deciding to just randomly go through their book bag? The answer is kind of obvious. It's like, no, but I could say to you, but I'm the professor. I have all of this power and influence. Well, I may have that. That may be true, but there's a social contract we have that I'm even governed by that says, when that person leaves, that's that person's property, and I don't have a right to leaf through their book bag just because they stepped out for a second. Now again, if the person is out, they left their book bag, and I need to find out who they are so I can return it, then that's a different story. But to just randomly rifle through things that belongs to students, I don't have the right to do that. I'm governed by that social contract, you see. And so social contracts do play a part in our society. Students expect to receive the grade in a class that they earned, not to be gifted a grade, not to be, you see what I'm saying? And so laws and customs, we have several of them right within our society as students and teachers here at SC4. Then the last one is done by Henry David Thoreau, and he said, look, This is if the law is of such a nature that it causes you to be an agent of injustice, then it is ethical to do what? To break the law. I love this one. It's called civil disobedience because a lot of times people will assume that because it's legal, then it's ethical, or because it's illegal, that it is unethical. No, there is a time when there's a splitting between what's ethical and what's legal. However, if a person is operating as a true agent of civil disobedience, they follow a certain code of conduct. One, they have knowledge of the consequences before they get started. They are willing to accept the penalty of the law for those consequences. And when asked to defend their actions, they will do so openly. Okay? Help me complete this quote. Give me liberty or, right, give me death. That quote came from an agent of civil disobedience. His name was Patrick Henry. He was a part of the whole Revolutionary War that we had, where we gained our independence. Okay, and he was originally with the British, and we got angry over them taxing us without asking us anything. We had taxation without representation, and when they came, they came. We took some tea, and we threw the tea into the water, and we have the Boston Tea Party. The British, they relied on that tea. It was a cash cow for them, and they decided that they wanted to put us in our place, and so they came after us. Patrick Henry knew that if he sided with the colonists, that he was caught, that it would be considered an act of treason, but he did it anyway. When he was caught, they wanted him to renounce his allegiance. Instead of doing so, he gave the quote, "Give me liberty or give me death." Unfortunately, he was put to death for saying that. He accepted the consequences, but his words inspired us, and we fought until we became a nation of our own. And even though we might not always remember who said it, we remember his words, "Give me liberty or give me death," till this day. And he was one of many true agents of civil disobedience. People who helped the Jewish people during the Holocaust, people who helped slaves, escape slavery, the tyranny of slavery. They weren't criminals, even though they broke the law in doing what they did. They were, however, agents of civil disobedience. All right, now we have covered several schools of thought. We've also rendered unto you an explanation of philosophy, and we've discussed the standards put forth by Aristotle related to ethos or ethics. It's now time to take all of that and start to think through how it applies to public speaking. Well, there's an exercise in the back of your handout called "Is This Ethical?" Every semester, I get a lot of requests for rather interesting topics. And I have to answer that question. I have to say, yes, you can talk about it, or no, you can't speak on this. And I have to be ready to give an explanation as to why. In this exercise, I've posed some of these scenarios to you, and I want you to answer it. Do you think it's ethical or don't you? For instance, is it ethical for a speaker to explain to students in a speech how they can break into the college computer and change their grades? Is it ethical to speak about how to pick a lock? Now, I don't want you to just say that it is or isn't ethical. That's the easy part. I want you to tell me why. Is it ethical because it falls under a particular philosophy? Is it unethical because it supports or seems to come from a particular fallacy? Can you look at the standards of Aristotle of good sense, goodwill, good moral character, and assess this as being ethical because of that or the lack thereof? Sorry, we have automatic lights in here, and sometimes they go on and off. If we're standing still for too long. I want you to answer this to the best of your ability, applying the concepts that I've introduced you to thus far. This handout is to be completed, and I will collect it when I return. I also, though, want you to, I want you to go into the online world and go into the forum and to put your thoughts out there. Mix it up a little bit. You put your thoughts out there, look for thoughts from others, and make a comment on their thoughts. Just be tasteful and tactful when you render your opinion, and that will work just fine, okay? Like I said, I will look for you to put your comments out there. Please try to get them out there before my return, and I've stated in class when that return will be. All right. However, if you're watching this video and it's not during the season where I have to be away for a few days, then that last comment does not apply to you. All right. Now, keep in mind that when you go to speak about ethics and you talk about fallacies and philosophies, that what you're dealing with is a value system. And values are important because they are those enduring standards, those standards that stay with us and that we stick to about what's good and bad, what's right or wrong, and what's important and what's unimportant. You may think that something is very important because it's always been emphasized in your family. But another person may have a family structure with rules and whatnot that don't emphasize that. Make sure that when you deal with that individual, you show an appreciation for the fact that they're different, even if you don't agree. How we choose to behave, how we choose to act, those things tend to indicate or show symptoms of what our value system is. Basically, our ethical choices are our values in action. When it comes to how I want you to act in this classroom, I expect you to treat people with dignity and integrity, whether you're up here behind the podium or you're seated in the audience. What does that mean? Well, dignity means that you treat them in a way that makes them feel worthy and honored, even if you find what they're saying to be different than the way you believe. Make sure that you avoid engaging in verbal compromise for the sake of personal gain. Don't tell them what they want to hear just so that you can gain an advantage over them, all right? You want to make sure that you don't forget that. We looked at the thoughts of Aristotle, but let's look at a more modern scholar, Michael Josephson. He had some standards too. You'll notice some similarities. The first standard he had was trustworthiness. When you look at trustworthiness, you'll see that a speaker that's ethical is considered to be honest and dependable. Sounds a whole lot like good moral character, trustworthy and straightforward. You reveal your true purpose from the beginning, and you don't mislead or deceive people, and you make sure you acknowledge sources with this one. The second one is to make sure you treat people right. Don't get into in-group, out-of-group distinctions. Don't start to assault a person and insult them because their views differ from yours. Stick with the issue and not the person, okay? And always allow people to still disagree with you. The power of rational choice is a right that people have, even if you feel like your argument is very, very sound, okay? The third one is be responsible. Assess what you're doing and make sure it's something that doesn't waste time for people. Like when I put together this video, I really had to think through, is this information that they need to know? Because I don't want to pull you in here and have you listen to a video for the length of time this is going to take for you to get nothing out of it, just to fill your time. I hate stuff like that, and it's unethical. You know, pick topics that you know will serve people well. And be honest, even when you appeal to the emotions, don't manipulate or browbeat people. But my favorite one is this one, fairness. Don't forget to work very hard to see all sides of the issue, even if it's different than how you feel. I had a roommate from China in my graduate work, when I had my graduate work, and China has the one-child rule. After you have one child, you cannot have any more. Even if you get pregnant, they expect you to abort. And she and I wrote together because I had a car, she needed to visit her husband, and I was going her way, so I took her, and she was very poor because she scraped up and spent every dime she had to attend the graduate program that we were in, and they charged her 2 and 3 times as much as they charged me. Don't know about the ethics of that one, but let's keep moving. In any case, I asked her about the abortion rule because I feel strongly about that. And she explained it to me this way. She told me, she said, look out the window. And she asked me, she says, what do you see, Tanji? I love it. She used to say my name, Tanji. She says, Tanji, what do you see? And I said, I see land. She said, in my world, she said, and her English was broken. She was still getting used to our culture. She says, I know see land. She said, I get up early, I know see land. I go to bed late at night, I know see land. We have three families, 2 houses. We have no room. She said, we don't do this, we die. See, I've never been faced with that. I've never had a house so filled with people that I couldn't think straight. I never had people, crowding the streets in the morning, crowding the streets in the afternoon and at night. Maybe if I did, I might have a different view. So even though, we talked about so many things, even though I didn't agree with what she said, I understood it, and I had a newfound respect for her and her people. And we talked about some things about our people too. And I think fairness is needed and understanding. So I think that that's a good thing. Lastly, you must understand that as a speaker, you must, with this new power, start to establish a code of ethics that you'll operate based on. The National Speakers Association has some renderings that are worthy of consideration, and if you are willing to go to their website and print off their code of ethics and to circle 2 that you find to be most meaningful, I will give you 5 bonus points for it, but I will only accept it on the day that the next day of class following this class, okay? But in any case, here are some other renderings for you to consider. A lot of these we've kind of touched upon, and you have these within your PowerPoint. Don't falsify information or mislead people. Make sure that you give people information. Don't withhold information that they may find useful. And make sure that you don't speak for personal gain at the expense of your audience. Give your message in a clear fashion, okay? And make sure that people are made aware of the probable consequences associated with it. Take responsibility and support the claims that you make. And make sure that you clarify any issue that you know is likely to confuse those who are in your audience. These are just some renderings for your consideration. Make sure that you stay away from bad habits like plagiarizing and taking other people's intellectual property as your own. Even if you paraphrase what they've said and you restate it, give them the credit, because you know what? They deserve it. In your packet, you have a statement called the Audience's Bill of Rights. As you come up with your philosophical code of ethics that you're going to operate based on, you also need to make sure that those ethical choices lead to certain actions. I expect you to look at this handout and to study it thoroughly, because these are the actions I expect you to execute in class in order to show respect for this public speaking venue, respect for the communication process, and respect for this class. How you function concerning these standards will affect your grade. I can't emphasize that enough. So it's important that you take the time to read through and review these. When I'm back with you in class in person, we will go over these one more time and to make sure that I clear up anything that you find confusing. But just for clarity, I will read them to you now if you happen to be watching this video and you don't have the PowerPoint. Make sure that you come to the podium prepared. Make sure, again, that you give significant and useful information. Tell the truth and nothing but the truth, and do not intentionally deceive people. Make sure you are punctual, do not unnecessarily delay the audience, and do not run way over time. that shows a disregard for people. Make sure you articulate clearly, you speak loud enough for everyone to hear. And make sure that you are courteous to people at all times. Now, as a speaker, there are certain expectations that you can have of any audience that you present to. I've had to stand up for my rights in this way, and I will always stand up for your rights as one of my students in this. You must, as a speaker, you have the right to make sure to not be heckled or and to not have to endure distractions from those who are in the audience. You've taken the time to prepare a message, so you deserve their undivided attention. If they have a question, they are to state that question in a clear and brief fashion and not attempt to undermine what you've said through comments. If I find that a person in class attempts to do this to you as a speaker, I will handle it. But I expect you to still maintain a demeanor that's courteous towards them. If we function in this manner, we'll have a successful class. And if you function in this manner, when you're out in the world, you'll find that looking at the man in the mirror is worthwhile. I will say, use the gut check. As a speaker, I've presented to many different audiences, and I can usually tell if I've done what I'm supposed to do based on what I feel in my gut when I look at myself in the mirror. If I'm ashamed in some way, usually if I go back and really think through what's going on, I'll find that in some way I haven't been true to ethos. But more often than not, and no one's perfect as a speaker, let me say that, but more often than not, I am very happy with the man in the mirror. Let me say this to you as a final thought. You may never be the world's most eloquent speaker, but if you are an ethical speaker, I will always be proud of you. That being said, I hope that you found this presentation enlightening, and I hope you enjoy the process of thinking through some of the scenarios that I've placed before you in the handout. I look forward to mixing it up with you in the forum and hearing your thoughts, towards the thoughts of, and how you bounce thoughts off of each other. And I look forward to seeing you once again in class. Have a good afternoon.